And the southern kingdom is reigning right now is Asa. So I kind of thought, okay, now historically, you know, this story happens about a third of the way through the northern kingdom's lifespan. Okay, so the Jeroboam split, and then the final demise of the northern kingdom. So we're talking about the northern kingdom, the more wicked of the two, and they're about a third of the way through their history. So I kind of thought, all this stuff that they're not really figuring out, is this like the end of the northern kingdom and the divided kingdom? It's like, no, they're still like getting fresh with this stuff, still trying to figure things out. So today's story takes place in the northern kingdom, and the king is Ahab. And I appreciated Aaron really touched on this last week. You know, Ahab is a wicked king. And you say, how wicked was he? Well, remember from last week's lesson, in verse 30, chapter 16, verse 30, Ahab, the son of Omri, did evil in the sight of the Lord more than all those who were before him. And in addition to that, he married Jezebel, who worshipped the Asherahs and the Ashtaroths and the Baals. And, you know, so these were wicked people. And if you think about how wicked they were, just to get some context, so the names, Ahab and Jezebel. So like Ahab. So Ahab becomes one of those names that's associated with evil and darkness. Like, remember from American literature, you remember another Ahab from a story about a whale, like Moby Dick, okay, the crazy guy, the crazy bad guy, you know, Ahab. So his name even gets associated with our culture as being a bad person. And then, of course, like Jezebel, I don't know, like where we grew up, that was kind of like, oh man, she's a Jezebel. Like that was a terminology. Okay, I said, I'm not the only person that, okay, you've heard that before. So like Jezebel's like, okay, that's a synonymous with a wicked woman. Okay, so this is really a bad time, and these are really bad people. And that brings us into today's story. Okay, so chapter 17, verse 1, Elijah just kind of drops into the story. Okay, Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab. So, you know, there are different books you read. Like, I like the novels that introduce a character, and they kind of say, oh yeah, and they kind of tell you about the character. I kind of do better with those novels than the novels. Drop the name and go with the story. But that's what this is. This is drop the name and go with the story. So we've got Elijah dropping here. So Elijah is from Gilead. So Gilead is that territory that's east of the Jordan. It's so large that you'll hear it kind of subdivided in the Bible. We'll talk about Ramoth Gilead and Jabesh Gilead and different places. And it's where the tribes like Reuben, Manasseh, and those tribes kind of take place. So we kind of drop him in. And I think that one thing I want us to think about is that of all the prophets in the Bible, you know, besides Jesus, you know, Elijah is probably the most prominent and greatest prophet. And I thought about, when I was thinking about this, I thought, well, I can think of 4 reasons if I was going to make this argument that Elijah was the greatest prophet besides Jesus. I'd make 4 arguments. So at the end of the lesson, so I want you to kind of percolate on that this morning and think about it. And at the end of the lesson, we'll kind of ask you to see if you can guess my list of 4 reasons why I think Elijah is kind of like the greatest, most prominent prophet besides Jesus in the Bible. So anyway, we drop this great prophet into these stories. And these are, today we basically have 3 different stories that have connections. Okay, so we're going to kind of like divide this into 3 different stories with connections. And you know that these are great stories because if you went to church as a child, these are the stories that we had in our Bible class. And I remember the sandbox people that we used to chase around the desert and stuff. And these stories were part of that. So these are really good stories that a lot of our kids have heard. So let's kind of read the first story, and then we'll kind of get into the other ones. So I'm reading the first story here from 1 Kings chapter 17, beginning verse 1. Now Elijah the Tishbite of Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, as the Lord lives, the God of Israel, before whom I stand, there shall be neither dew nor rain these years except by my word. And the word of the Lord came to him, depart from here and turn eastward, and hide yourself by the brook Cherith, which is east of the Jordan. You shall drink from the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed you there. So he went and did according to the word of the Lord. He went and lived by the brook Cherith, that is east of the Jordan, and the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening, and he drank drank from the brook. After a while, the brook dried up because there was no rain in the land. So Elijah goes to Ahab and delivers this message that you've got a famine coming, you've got a drought coming, it's going to be a long one. And then what does he do? What does Elijah do? He goes to the brook, but why does he go? Why does he leave? The Lord told him, and the Lord told him to go hide. Okay, why did he have to hide? He's just delivered some really bad news to the king, right? So he's afraid, that they're going to shoot the messenger. He had to deliver this news that you've got a famine coming here, you've got a drought coming here, no rain for 3 years. And so God said, you got to go hide. This guy's going to be after you. And I thought, how often in life do we shoot down people who tell us what we don't want to hear? How often do we shoot the messenger? Someone comes to our life with a message that we really need to hear. I mean, you are the king of the country, buddy. If there's no rain for 3 years, you need to know this. This could be useful information. You could use it. But apparently the reaction was going to be vindication against the messenger, so you go hide. So I'm thinking of another story in the Bible where a ruler of a nation had someone come to him to tell him about some years of famine. Anybody guess the story I'm thinking of here? Joseph in Egypt, right? Okay, so Pharaoh, and this kind of ticks me off. Okay, so like Pharaoh, a king who worships the sun god and crazy stuff. Someone from God comes to him and tells him there's going to be a famine, and the Pharaoh does what? He embraces it, he uses it, he plans for it, and things in the story turns out well, right? And then you've got this king who's supposed to be the king of one of God's nations, and someone comes to him with a message, and what does he do? He apparently is going to... I'm sorry, go ahead. Right.
Especially when I am the king.
Right.
I have all this power, and that isn't going to help against what God does.
And it just ticks me off that sometimes, like, godless people get it, and we don't. And we don't listen to the things that we should listen to. So anyway, that's kind of my little qualification there. But so we oftentimes shut down people that tell us what we need to hear, but we don't want to hear. And then the last thing is, so he goes and hides to this place that doesn't have any like restaurants or stores, and how does God supply him with food? This crazy miracle, right? The ravens, that birds bring him food, bread and meat. They deliver it. I mean, this is why this makes the Bible stories for kids. This is crazy imagery. It's really neat. So what's the lesson from the ravens? What do we learn from the ravens about God and his interaction with his people? He's in control. And God provides for his people. That's what I was looking for. God provides for his people. And I think this is so. I don't have a corner in the market of stress. I understand there's a lot of people that have a lot more stress, and I'm sure a lot of you have more stress in their life than I do. But the last few months I've been like majorly stressed with all the transitions. And so my wife sends me, and because we're talking about God provides for his people. He really does take care of us. And so my wife sends me screenshots, every day or every other day. And I want to read a couple of screenshots she sent me because she's trying to make this point to me that, God takes care of his people, all right? You relax on a plane even though you don't know the pilot. You relax on a ship even though you don't know the captain. You relax on a bus even though you don't know the driver. Why don't you relax knowing that God is in control? Like, oh man, she got it. A preacher said, if you can trust a puzzle company to make sure every piece is in the box to complete the puzzle, why can't you trust God that every piece of your life is there to make the whole puzzle picture? Yeah. Like, how do you do that? And then she sent me this other one. Yes, we do. God didn't remove the Red Sea, he parted it. God doesn't always remove your problems, he'll make a way to get through them. So God didn't make Elijah's life rosy. He had to go camp out. He didn't get to stay at the Holiday Inn. But he took care of it. He gave what he needed. So, great story, good stuff. Okay, now we get on to really the meat of today's lesson, and that is the widow of Zarephath. Now, so we're talking about Elijah, and so basically, almost everything we know about Elijah in the Bible is in today's lesson. He begins, and then Elijah kind of drops out in 2 Kings, like chapter 2, something like that. So this is all the stuff we know about Elijah. So the widow of Zarephath kind of has two different stories here, and the wind-up story is pretty straightforward, and then there's what I call the meat of the matter story. So let's kind of look at the wind-up story first in today's lesson. So the context is there's no rain in the land, and I'm looking at verse 8, I'm going to read through verse 12 here. Then the word of the Lord came to him, Arise, go to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, and dwell there. Behold, I have commanded a woman there to feed you. So he arose and went to Zarephath. And when he came to the gate of the city, behold, a widow was there gathering sticks. And he called to her and said, Bring me a little water in a vessel that I may drink. And as she was going to bring it, he called to her and said, Bring me a morsel of bread in your hand. And she said, As the Lord your God lives, I have nothing baked, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. And now I'm gathering a couple of sticks that I may go home and prepare it for myself and my son, that we may eat and die. So there's no rain in the land, and I'm thinking, okay, so this is an example where God sends a particular person, the prophet, to a particular person who has a particular need. And I'm thinking, wow, the providence of God, putting Elijah in this woman's life who is on her last, she's got enough to cook one more meal. The final kind of gives the different definition of Last Supper, right? So she's going to cook the meal, they're going to eat it, and they're going to die of starvation. Is that clear? So comment about that. What's your some comments about the providence of God putting particular people in your life at particular points for particular reasons? Anybody want to kind of add to that comment? She had lost hope.
He's not here to save you, but I'm here to seek your help. And if she's willing to help him, then God's willing to help her.
Absolutely. Yeah, she was, right. She was very close to despair. So I think I can look back at my life and I can see that certain people were sent into my life at certain times for certain reasons. And you know when I figured that out? Yeah, after. How much after? Way after. Okay, long time. Okay, that's what I was looking for. Yeah, so about 10 years later, I'm thinking, oh man, that was the promise of God. That person was in my life at that time for that reason. I'm thinking, and that's the way God's providence works. It's just like He doesn't always put it on the billboard for us to understand or to follow. It happens like He wants it to. And later on, we figured it out. Well, I love her objectivity here. She's not being a drama queen.
Was she even a follower of, the Israelite God at that time?
So, I think, it doesn't say that specifically, but I think with her reaction and her recognizing him as a man of God, and she called him man of God later.
Sure, I remember that.
Yeah, so I think with her, the way she speaks about it, I think she is. But she's very objective. She's not a drama queen. She's not like, oh, we're going to eat it. And she's like, we have enough for a meal. We're going to eat it. We're going to die. So, she was on the brink. Okay, let's finish out the last part of this story. Elijah said to her, do not fear. Go and do as you said. But first make me a little cake of it and bring it to me. And afterwards make something for yourself and for your son. For thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, the jar of flour shall not be spent, and the jug of oil shall not be emptied until the day that the Lord sends rain upon the earth. And she went and did as Elijah said, and she and her household ate for many days. The jar of flour was not spent, neither did the jug of oil become empty, according to the word of the Lord that He spoke by Elijah. So Elijah tells her the plan. Okay, the plan is, and he tells her up front, go cook and you'll be fine. And what does she do? She complies with it. She does exactly what he's saying. And I think there's a lesson there when we're told what to do and we do it. Now this even spells it out. And that's one of the parts I struggle with is I know God has a plan. I just wish He'd tell me what it is and I'd be okay with it. But this is where, you know, the plan is laid out for her and she complies. And then we have kind of the magic kitchen. You know, she feeds her household and she feeds him for many days and things don't get used up. And I guess I got 2 points from this. One is, you know, God is not bound by our understanding of physics, right? You know, there's this much oil, there's this much flour, you can make this much stuff, right? Well, God isn't bound by those physics. You know, he can take this, I mean, it's the 5 loaves, 2 fishes thing, right? And you know, he can make what he wants to. He's not bound by that. What's my point? My point is that when we have trials and tribulations in our lives, and we pray, and sometimes I'll suggest to God how he should solve this problem, right? So I've got my choices A, B, C. Okay, well, God, am I the only person to suggest solutions to God? Okay, good. How many solutions are on God's list of ways he could fix this problem? It's endless, and some of them defy logic. Some of them are not bound by my understanding of physics and time and energy and things like that. So God is not bound by physics. I do have to say a funny word though. When I read this story like years and years ago, when I was reading this, I thought about, I actually have some patients who have magic pill bottles just like this magic flower bottle, because they'll be in the office and I'll say, we need a refill for your blood pressure medicine. No, I've got plenty. I'm thinking, man, that 9-day prescription lasted 2 years. So we have a magic pill bottle, we have little non-compliance or something like that. But this was truly a magical thing that happened. Okay. Any comments about that story before we get into the big one? Okay, so now we get to the big story. Okay, so we've got this relationship between Elijah and the woman and her son, and then tragedy strikes the household. Okay, so chapter 17, verse 17, after this, the son of the woman, the mistress of the house, became ill, and his illness was so severe that there was no breath left in him. Okay, so her son dies. Nothing, I think, can be worse than the death of a child, especially a young child. And this is a big enough class that there's probably someone in here that knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if so, my heart goes out to you. But you know, I've been through this with people professionally, and it's horrible. You know, there is no right thing to say. You know, when someone loses a child, it is a devastating thing. You know, the old saying, you know, nobody should die before their children. Your children should not die before you, I guess I'm trying to say. But this is what happens. Okay, so we see the reaction in verse 18. She says to Elijah, "What have you against me, O man of God? You have come to me to bring my sin to remembrance and to cause the death of my son." So the woman's son dies. Who does she blame?
Praise God. That's when I'm like, why is she blaming God
Right.
in this?
So she blames God, and before you answer that question, why, she also views this as a punishment for something. What's she? Her sins. Okay, she views this as she's done something wrong. This is why it's happened. So, do we blame God for stuff that happens in our lives? Oh, absolutely. God, why did you let? Oh God, why did you? Oh God, I didn't need this. Why did you? I mean, have you not been there with prayer? I have. And so we tend to blame God, and that's horrible when we do that. But there's kind of a reason why I think we do. It comes back to this providence of God, this belief that God interacts in our lives. So you hear Christians, well-meaning Christians, say everything happens for a reason. I believe that's not a biblical concept. I do not believe the Bible says that. Now, a lot of people misconstrue a passage in the Bible. Anybody know what I'm thinking about here? Romans 8:28, all things work together for them that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose. That's not saying everything happens for a reason. That's saying that things that happen can result in good. It doesn't mean that God's up there doing cars. Well, here Mark works with these tornadoes in the house. I don't believe God did that. Okay? So not everything happens for a reason. It's not a biblical concept, but you will hear people say that. Now, I know why people say it. Why do people want to believe that?
I say it.
You say it.
No,
Sorry, didn't mean to step on your toe.
No, I said it because, I mean, I don't think God did this on purpose. If something happened, and that's why I say not everything happens for a reason, but I think sometimes there is a reason.
Exactly.
And maybe it's, and I know, I'm human and I make mistakes, but.
I think you said that so well. Because, I think people want to believe that everything does happen for a reason. That way, when something bad happens, God decided. But the reality, back to providence, I think some things do happen for a reason,
I
and some things
think
don't.
God did that, and a car got wrecked
Right.
or whatever. I know that's not God.
Right.
It's me.
Right. And so the providence of God, some things do happen in our life for a reason. So sometimes there is a reason.
Absolutely.
And sometimes God is behind it, and sometimes He's not. And that's the providence of God, that we know is there, but we're not always able to say, that was God's providence, that was not. See?
Brings to mind Job, that, there was another force at work there.
Right.
We blame God for things, and sometimes it's Satan.
Yeah, amen.
Exactly. So Steve just led into my next point here, is that, remember the Lord's Prayer, our Father art in heaven, hallowed be thy name, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Why do we pray for the will of God to be done if that's not an automatic given? And the answer is it's not an automatic given. There are other forces at work here. So not everything happens for a reason. And then I guess the final thing I'll say is that one thing we can really learn from this passage is, boy, this is just a practical thing that I've found out in my life is, man, be careful, especially when people are really hurting, with the words that we console people with. They must be in a better place, or God must have had a reason, or He must have needed them in heaven, or it happened for a purpose.
My mom always said, for every bad day happens, something good comes out.
Right, and I think that goes back to the Romans 8 passage, yeah, that we can work together for good.
You just have to look at Jesus. I mean, that's a perfect example. If He hadn't done that, I mean, when He asked the Lord to take the cup from Him, but the reality is, it had to be done.
Right,
So that we could even be standing.
right.
And so God does have a purpose, and He does allow these things. And a lot of it is to stretch us, to test us, and help us grow. I mean, He allows it. But it may not have been His greatest plan, but I mean, if it weren't for what has happened to me, I wouldn't be here.
Right. So, and just to beat this point to death, because I think it's just really important when we are choosing our words of consolation, especially when there's a disaster. I remember a lecture, when I was in medical school almost 40 years ago, I remember very specifically a lecture where, and I don't remember all the lectures, so obviously it struck a chord with me. And it was a neonatologist, someone who takes care of like premature babies and, really, infants that are just born and struggling. And he was talking about death because they deal with death a lot in people that really should not die. And he was saying, and this was it was not a Christian lecture. This was a secular lecture. He said, when you're involved in these, there is nothing right you can say to people who lose a child. There's nothing, but you can say things that are wrong. So your job is just don't do that. And his points were, don't say you can have another child. And don't say there must have been a reason. And this is just a common thing out there. There's a guy I did a residency with. So we were in medical school in a residency together, and he and his wife, who were also doctors, they lost a child. They lost a child, and she was still pregnant. They lost a child, and his priest, he was trying to search for answers, and so he talked to his priest. And his priest had told him, well, this must have been God's will so that he would be more compassionate to people in the future. And so he came to me, he said, Mark, I know you're just religious. He said, I can't buy this. I said, well, I don't buy it either. I do agree that something like this happens can you can use this in the future somehow, but I do not believe that the God I serve and love, dealt you this card for your betterment. I just don't accept that. And he needed to hear that, and that was a good thing. Okay, so we're talking about the death of a child. So then we talk to Elijah. So 19 through 20. So she's blaming God, and then 19:20, and he said to her, "Give me your son," and he took him from her arms and carried him up into the upper chamber where he lodged, and laid him on his bed. And he cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, have you brought calamity even upon the widow with whom I sojourn by killing her son?" So the man of God does what? He blames God, or he kind of questions God, like, should I be blaming you, kind of is what he's saying. So I guess the point is that, highly evolved religious people aren't immune from this blaming God thing either. Why did you do this, God? But we'll kind of skip that point. What's the first thing he did after he carried the boy upstairs? What's the first thing he did? Laid him on the bed, and then he prayed, he cried, he prayed to the Lord. And I'm thinking, crisis brings us to prayer. It really does. I remember, and I think I've shared this in Bible class before, so if I did, you were here, I apologize, but it's so vivid. I remember this cartoon. It's a CEO sitting behind a desk, and he's saying, money isn't everything, but it keeps the kids in touch. And I'm thinking, I have this picture of God in heaven on his throne that says, calamity and crises and trials, they're not everything, but they keep my kids in touch. And I'm thinking, as I go through my life, and I look at my life, and I've got the trials and tribulations, little things are going good, and trials and tribulations, things are going good. And if you could plot my prayer life, it would follow that curve. The trials and tribulations, I'm praying, things are good, and it's so shameful, and it's so shameful that I'm that way, but I doubt the other person here that way. But we just need to kind of think about that. So crisis brings us to prayer, which is good, but we also need to think about, I'm sure God would like to hear from us when things are going great. So trials and tragedy also bring us into perspective. This woman lost her son. There's something about real loss that brings clarity to how we think. And I'm thinking, as I've done in the past with people who have terminal illnesses and know it, they have a clarity of thought of life that I don't have. And a lot of us don't have. They really are able to pick out what is important in life and what is not. So sometimes trials and tribulations, like you were saying, they are good for us. They bring us to prayer, and they also remind us of, okay, put perspective into our life about what's really important, what's really not. Okay, so then we have verses 21 and 23. Any comments about the prayers or the trials before we go on here? Okay, so 21 through 23, we have the miracle. Then he stretched himself above the Lord 3 times and cried to the Lord, "O Lord my God, let this child's life come into him again." And the Lord listened to the voice of Elijah, and the life of the child came into him again, and he revived. And Elijah took the child and brought him down from the upper room into the house and delivered him to his mother. And Elijah said, "See, your son lives." So we have a miracle. And I think that I'd just like to take a second and talk about the definition of a miracle. Because we use this term wrong. Something happens, someone's in a horrific car wreck and they're not hurt when they should be. We say it's a miracle. Well, no, it's not really. It's fortunate, it's lucky, and there may be some providence, but it's not a miracle. A miracle is when something happens that cannot happen. You have this much flour and this much oil, and you make this much bread. That's impossible. Someone is dead and they are brought back to life. That is impossible. That's a miracle. So sometimes we dilute God's miracles by using the word incorrectly, but miracles are truly amazing, and his intervention reveals his glory. And then we have the last verse of the chapter, and the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know you are a man of God, and the word of the Lord is in your mouth." The Lord in your mouth. Let me do this again. And the woman said to Elijah, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord in your mouth is truth." There we go. So the result of all this tragedy and trial and loss is what in the woman's faith walk? What does it do to her faith walk? It strengthens it. It strengthens it, it deepens her trust in God. And I think that's true in our life. You know, when we go through trials, we are stronger. You know, if you look at, and I'm really a person that just hasn't, I mean, I have not had a lot of hardship in my life. But I know a lot of people who've had a lot of hardship in their life, and they are tough, strong people. Hardship and trials make us really strong. And when we come through it, we also have this trust in God. You know, it's just like someone who's always got your back. You know, after a while you realize they've got your back, they'll always have your back. Okay, any comments about that?
You know, as a Christian, and things that go bad, they're not even comparable to some things that people go through.
Right.
Some we think, you know, how bad it is, but, and I'm really bad about that, and trying not to do that.
Right.
But how amazing it is that you can, you know, as you grow stronger in the Lord, how you can see at the end of the tunnel, you know, that, you know, thank you for getting me through that and being with me. And it really is, it's a lot of work,
Right.
but it is amazing when you get to that end of the tunnel.
And it's a maturity thing, and it shows our maturity and our immaturity. And so, and I'm really reactive. I'm like, you know, when a crisis happens in my life, I'm like, you know, the sky is falling and stuff like that. And it's like this past week was a real, like, you know, thing for me. So Joyce calls Brent and Ryan, so call your dad, talk him off the ledge, you know. And so, like we need those people in our life and that faith just to continue to remind us, like, you know, put this in perspective.
It's just a rough.
Right.
Nobody
was killed. Right.
And that is the truth.
Absolutely.
That's the way I have to think about it in my life. It could be worse.
Right.
I could not have a home. I could not have this, right? And you know, and then it's just like, thank you, Jesus.
And it's a maturity thing, and it's wonderful when we have, you know, Christians in our fellowship that you can see that maturity. They know God's got them, and it's like, it's really wonderful when you see that.
You know, what's really interesting is just the story alone makes you go, ooh, yeah. He was there.
Yeah.
God was always,
He was there.
every scripture you read, you can see the hand of God, and you're like, you're no less important than him.
Right.
So that's, you know, that's why we have all these beautiful little stories or,
Yeah.
you know, history.
You make a really good point that I really didn't make, is that through this whole story, you see, I mean, God, you know, he's there all the time.
He's got
Yeah, it's really cool. Okay, so that's the lessons for today. I just thought I got a couple things at the end here, but Elijah, the greatest prophet of all time. Anybody want to throw out an argument? Like why? There's a few things that don't. What's that?
He was very brave.
He was very brave. There's a few things that happened to him that didn't happen to very many other people.
Right.
Anybody want to hit any of them? Or I'm sorry.
He didn't.
He didn't die. Okay, so yeah, he didn't die. So he was taken to heaven in a whirlwind with chariots of fire. We got a great movie named after that, Chariots of Fire. So
That's another, like, what not to say kind of thing. God took what? Elijah, Moses, who else?
Enoch,
You know, we die,
yeah,
not God took you early, God needed you,
right,
those kind of things.
exactly. So one of the things was he didn't die. So he's one of the few people in the Bible that didn't die. That was one. There's a couple other things that, like something else that very few people. The Mount of Transfiguration.
Yes.
Jesus went up to the mount, and there were two people that appeared with him, Moses and Elijah. So I mean, Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. I mean, that's a pretty select crowd. And I guess the way I've always understood that is you got the greatest human lawgiver, the greatest human prophet, with the greatest prophet lawgiver in one, kind of wrapped up. So that's another great thing. Another reason why you say Elijah kind of separates out himself from the crowd. One from this story, he raised somebody from the dead. If you start making a list, I like to go down these rabbit holes. So if you like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So there are 8 accounts in the Bible of people being raised from the dead, except for the one where all the saints came up when Jesus died, the crucifixion, and who knows how many people. I mean, that was a mass non-casualty event, right?
Yes.
I don't know what the word would be. But besides that, you only got 8 people. So like Elijah raised somebody from the dead, Elisha did, Jesus, the 3 people Jesus raised from the dead, singularly. Tabitha was Peter, Paul was Eutychus, and then you got the massive one, then you got the weird story where they threw a guy in Elisha's grave and he came to life. So anyway, so Elijah raised someone from the dead through God's glory. So that's a third thing. And then the other one was the prophecy, Malachi chapter 4. Who was prophesied to come to announce Jesus? Elijah. Okay, I will send Elijah the prophet in Malachi. And Jesus recognized that fulfillment of Scripture in the persona of whom? John the Baptist. Yeah. So Jesus said, if you're willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. So Elijah was going to be the announcer. The figuratively the announcer of Jesus. So anyway, Elijah's a big guy. So I just thought that was some fun trivia. Anybody think of another reason why we put him on the Hall of Fame of Prophets? Okay. And then, so let's just go over our take-home points. Oh, let's see, I can do the next thing here. Oh, we're blocked up there. Oh, I'm getting one more. There we go. Push the right button, it helps. Okay, so these are the take-home. I got 7 take-home points for today's lesson. God provides for his people. That comes from Elijah and the ravens. And so, yeah, so as you know, we're moving, so we're putting out 32 years of stuff. And I was working on this lesson yesterday, and I was putting out some stuff, and I came across this card from Bill Vidrick. And it was, I think somebody died, he said it's a card, he doesn't say who. I assume this is probably my dad died, that's what I assume. But in it, there's a note about it, but then there's, be not dismayed, whatever betide. There's the word of the psalm, God will take care of you, okay? Beneath his wings of love abide, God will take care of you. Through days of toil when heart will fail, God will take care of you. When dangers fierce your path assail, God will take care of you. All that you need, he will provide. God will take care of you. Nothing you ask will be denied. God will take care of you. So I'm like, wow, that was like a very interesting occurrence yesterday. So point number 1, God provides for his people. He takes care of us. Second lesson is sometimes God sends a particular person to a particular place to help with a problem. I think sometimes we need to flip that around. Sometimes we have to realize that maybe we're being sent. And so sometimes we'll find ourselves in a situation like, I wonder if I'm here for a reason. Like, I wonder if, maybe I'm not here just by happenstance. Maybe I didn't encounter a stranger just by circumstance. Maybe I was put here to say something. So anyway, so God sends people our way, and obviously it means he sends us other people's ways, right?
Well, it's like believing in your son.
Yeah.
Believing in your son. If Elijah would not show up, she perished.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, but her kindness to Elijah saved her life, her son's life, and helped Elijah.
Right. Exactly. The third point is God's not bound by the law of physics. Just to remind us that God can solve our problems in ways that we just really can't imagine. The other points are, blaming God for our trials is not fair. It's not fair. There are things that probably do come our way by his design. There are probably a lot of things that don't come our way by his design. And unless we're masters of the universe, we can't really figure out which ones are which. Crisis brings us to prayer. Crisis brings things into perspective. And then the last point is that hardships deepen our trust in God and strengthen us. So that's the lesson for today. Thanks for listening. Your comments. Next week is the prophets of Baal. Another great story from childhood classes and stuff. Really good story. Yeah, thanks.
So,
What's his name? Mine is
Guy from last year.
Oh, I would love one. Thank you so much, Oliver.